We're meeting this afternoon in Augusta, Georgia, at the home of Lori Bedell, excuse me for the delay, with Maurice Jean Pebbles from Arizona in this week visiting his daughter and her family. He is now going to relate his experiences during World War II as a Marine veteran. I am Fred Gailey, representative of the Augusta-Richmond County Historical Society, conducting an interview on November 30, 2008, in Evans, a suburb of Augusta, Georgia. Gene, let's hear your story from your experience beginning with Pearl Harbor Sunday, December 7th, 1941.
Yeah, as a prelude, I would like to say that in a few years past, I started writing the memoirs on my time in the service. The information I'm presenting today is from memory that I hopefully can remember accurately. Some information was taken from the 5th Marine Division book, which lists the entire complement of the division, the section on those who were killed, and a section on those who have been wounded. Also, it listed people that got medals and commendations. In my write-up, I was more specific in identifying the personnel in my platoon that were killed or wounded at the particular time that they were wounded and killed. This information was received or got from microfilm that I'd got from the archives in Washington, D.C., so it's very accurate. On December the 7th, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, I was a senior in high school, and that Sunday I was working in the drugstore, as usual, and was making a delivery. And the home I delivered to, they had the radio on, and I heard the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor. When I returned back to the drugstore, I spread the news around, and one of the cooks got hysterical and was crying because her brother happened to be on Pearl Harbor at that particular time. But luckily, we found out later that he was safe and hadn't been harmed. On the next day in high school, we heard President Roosevelt's speech where he declared war on the Empire of Japan. Many of the seniors at that time immediately just quit going to school and went and signed up, but I was determined that I was going to graduate in another 6 months, and I wanted to finish high school first. At this time of the country, President Roosevelt was just still trying to get us out of the Depression area. We've become an isolationist country, and he was trying his best to keep us out of the raging war that was over in Europe at the time. We were sending supplies over there, though, to help them out. If the Japanese had known how weak we were and ill-prepared for a great war, they could have hit the West Coast, and we'd been in a lot of trouble. But the American public has always been a resilient group of people, and immediately all pitched together. Businesses, plants started booming, building stuff for the war. I quit, after I graduated, I quit working in the drugstore and started working at an electronic facility, doing some testing, and signed up for the draft when I reached 18. A good friend of mine named Bob Riley and myself, we decided we'd try to get in the services together, and so we could serve together. And for some reason or other, we came up, we'd go join the Army at and get in field artillery. Well, Bob got it called before I did, and he wrote me a letter a week later, and he says he was in the Marines, so that changed some things. A couple of weeks later, I got called up too, and luckily I got in the Marines also and head for Marine Depot at San Diego. we arrived there and met a guy who thought he was God Almighty, I think, but they called him a DI. And he let us know in no uncertain terms that we belonged to him. And when he said something, we was to jump and do what he said. Later on, we learned that this was a good philosophy, because when somebody gives a command, it may be the one that saves their lives. We did a lot of marching, a lot of calisthenics, shooting the rifle. And I'd never been out of the state before, never fired any big rifles. So I wasn't as proficient as I would like to have been, but I did make marksman, which was considered to be good enough. Got a letter from Bob, and he stated that he'd signed up for the paratroopers, so when the slip of paper came around, I did the same thing. Well, as luck would have it, we would never get together. He was signed to the 2nd Marine Division, fought on the island of Tarawa, and I was heading to Camp Gillespie in El Cajon to take my parachute training. The first 2 weeks was calisthenics, running, learning how to pack a chute, because we found out that what chute we were going to jump with, we had to pack. So we made sure that it was put together in the right fashion. By the end of 2 weeks of all the tumbling and stuff that we was doing, we were so sore we could hardly sit down. The 3rd week we was gone to the captive tower and the flyaway towers, which was about 200 feet high. And you get in the harness and they haul you up to the top and trip you off on the captive tower, and the guide wires would guide you down to a mat down there that looked like a postage stamp. And you learn how to land with a soft landing by bending your knees when you hit the mat. And then we went to the flyaway towers, which cuts you loose, and you get the first impression of what it's like to float down with a parachute and learn how to tumble when you land. This all went well. In the 4th week, we used to go to the aircrafts and start jumping out of planes. I don't think I was ever scared, but I was always nervous every time we was getting ready to load on the plane. There was DC-5s that McDonnell built. Many years later, when I was working for the Department of Defense, and one of the facilities I was working in, there's a McDonnell Douglas representative there. And I told him we jumped from DC-5s that they made. He said, no, we didn't make no DC-5s. So after arguing quite a bit, he finally decided to go check it out. And one day he came to me with a picture of the old aircraft that we was jumping out of. They'd built about 12 of them. Well, each jump, we jumped at 1,000 feet, and there was 12 to 16 people at each jump. The first jump, I was about halfway back, and when the jump master said hook on, you'd hook your static line on the guy wire. He'd check it out, make sure that everybody was all hooked up properly. And he said, stand by and go. And we just rushed out and jumped out of the plane. The Army kind of hesitated when their paratroopers jumped out at the door, and I didn't want that. It was much better just to run and out the door. And about the 3rd jump, for some reason or other, I moved up to about the 2nd or 3rd position. So when they said stand by, I'm looking right outside the door then. And I said to myself, is this $50 extra a month really worth it? But we got through the 6 jumps of our original training. I didn't have any problems. Continued throughout the time that I was at Camp Gillespie. We made a total of 13 jumps. But after the 4th week, we was full-fledged Marine paratroopers. It was one of the best camps. It was small, but it was one of the best camps that I was ever stationed at. Chow hall, we went in, sat down at tables. We had paratroopers that had got mess duty that would serve us and all this. Food was wonderful, and the time spent there was something that we could always remember. Sometime a few weeks later, we jumped on the town of Escondido and took over the town. Of course, this was all prearranged. And then they had a 50-mile forced march back to the camp, and we pulled in late that night. As luck would have it, old Pebbles, he got drawn for mess duty. And while I was serving that, most of the people that I went through training with at Camp Gillespie was shipped out to New Caledonia in the South Pacific. And I was stuck there at Camp Gillespie. They was making a film Gung Ho with Robert Ryan and Ruth Hussey, and they did a lot of the shooting there at Camp Gillespie and showed paratroopers jumping out of the plane. And Robert Ryan, he got out of the harness on the captive tower, and they put me in the harness and took me out of the picture. But my time as a movie star was short-rated because they didn't use that particular cut in the movie. But we kept hearing that the paratroopers and Marine Raiders were going to be disbanded and make up a new Marine division. They brought all the paratroopers back from New Caledonia, and in that group there was a lot of paratroopers that was seasoned Marines. They'd fought on Vella La Vella during the Guadalcanal expedition. So we had some people that could help us in what we was to expect when we got into battle. On January the 1st, 1944, we moved to Camp Pendleton, and the 5th Division was born. I became part of the 27th Marines, 3rd Battalion, Company H. And we had 8 months of training, consistently attacking small hills and rugged terrain, really preparing us for what was to come. At Camp Pendleton, we changed our Liberty status and ended up going to LA for our Liberty. And one of the Marines had a car, and there's 5 of us pitched in for the gas, and that's where we spent our Liberties up there. I didn't drink, so I was pretty much a loner, and I'd always went to Hollywood, went to the movies and different studios where they was making pictures. Got to meet Fred McMurray on one set. And I went to a couple of studios, radio studios, where they was making the broadcast, and seen Dinah Shore 2 or 3 times. And the hit parade one time, I got in there, and there's very young Frank Sinatra on the stage singing. And the front row was lined with little teenagers with opera glasses that was looking at Frank Sinatra right in front of them. And every time he'd shake a leg or something, they'd let out some screams. But the movie stars at that time was a different caliber than they are today. They really pitched in and did a lot for the military personnel, helping them out and making them feel wanted and thankful for what they was doing. They had bought a large house in Hollywood, and they called it the Hollywood Guild Canteen. Now this was different from the basic Hollywood canteen. They had a lot of cots set up where the military, when they was on leave, had a place to sleep, served 3 hot meals a day, and usually was a few young girls there that you could talk to at night, which made it real nice, and you was comfortable. One night I was hitchhiking back to go hit the sack, and a big car stopped to pick me up. And I opened the door, and lights went on around the baseboard of the back seat. And I got in, sat down, looked over, and there was John Carradine sitting next to me. The younger generation probably knows his son better than John. David was Kung Fu, I think it was. And he made several films of that and television movies. After 8 months of training there at Camp Pendleton, we got the word that we was getting ready to move out, going to the Big Island of Hawaii. On August the 12th, we went down to San Diego, boarded the ships down there, and headed for the Big Island. There's a rancher that owned a considerable amount of property in there out in the middle dry portion of the island. And they allowed the Marines to build a tent camp, and they called it Camp Tararva. We had, we got there in August, and we started doing a lot of field practice, shooting with live ammunition. On one of the ammunition, the top sergeant got killed, and nobody knew what happened. Was somebody was mad at him, or whether he took a stray bullet. And then the next day they tried to reenact this, and somebody picked up a grenade, and it was a dud, and it went off, and he got killed also. So even while we was there, we were faced with situations that we was going to get to when we hit the island. The only thing wrong with that particular tour of duty on Hawaii is we didn't have any hot water, and we had to take cold showers, which wasn't real good. But about the last month we was there, we finally got hot water. Around Christmas time, we got the word that we were just about ready to move out and hit an island just south of the mainland of Japan. We didn't know any particulars, but we had seen some picture of the map in one of the buildings. It looked like a big pork chop that we was going to land on. On December the 30th, we headed for Hilo, boarded the ships, and headed out to sea. We had one day that we spent at Oahu, and we got to walk the beaches there and see a little bit of that area. The next night, we made a night landing on the island of Maui, and then we headed for Eniwetok. We pulled in there in the evening, and the next morning we were looking around, and man, there was just ships all over the place. And we was going to make a landing there, but the waves were about 20 feet high, and it was just impossible without somebody getting hurt to get aboard the Higgins boat.
So this is 1945?
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we left Eniwetok for the last 750 miles, where we would hit Iwo Jima on the 19th of February.
Now, for a moment, if I may, what were you being trained to do as a combat Marine? What was your role or function as far as your skills and your duties as a member of the platoon or the squad that you were part of?
Well, we acted as a whole, and we was trained to work together, watch the other person, watch your own back. I don't recall of ever being afraid of what I was to expect. The only medal that I was wanting was the Purple Heart, because I kind of felt that I was going to get wounded. I didn't have any doubts about that.
You had that premonition that
Yeah.
You weren't going to get unscathed through
Right.
combat coming up.
But I don't recall that I was ever scared. Of course, every night in the foxhole, I always said a little prayer. And I'm sure he heard me, because I had about 7 close calls, 5 of which was meant for me. And but as far as being scared, you couldn't let that take over, because it was a detriment to what you had to do. Because you're not only trying to save your life, but you got the lives of your buddies that you're thinking about also.
You also mentioned being trained as a BAR man, Browning automatic rifle. How is that different from someone carrying a carbine?
Well, to go back just a hair, when I was still in the paratroopers, when we jumped, we had a folding stock 30 caliber carbine, which wasn't much firepower. The BAR was a automatic weapon that you squeezed the trigger, it cut off several rounds, or you could put it on full automatic and it would just blast away. I found out that if you turned the sear 180 degrees, I could squeeze off one shot and then put it on full automatic if I wanted full blown and empty a magazine. So it was a good firepower weapon. And the only problem on Iwo Jima was the sand would get into the magazines and then it would jam your gun. So you'd have to keep everything spotless clean. We didn't have any little Glad bags or anything like that at the time that you could put it in to keep the sand out of the magazine. So it was a weapon that you had to keep clean if you wanted it to fire properly.
But in a given squad of Marines, were there more than one BAR men, or was there one assigned to each squad?
There was probably 2 BRs to each squad in the platoon.
Squad being how many men?
Oh, about 12 people, something like that, maybe
A
about
dozen.
15, something like that. I don't remember exactly how many. So we had enough firepower, plus we had machine guns that were part of the complement also. So we had plenty of firepower. There's no doubt about that. When we left and we talked and we arrived at Iwo on the night of the 18th, they got us up real early the next morning. They had steak and eggs and daylight. We got to go up on top side and look around. And it started getting light and you could see the island of Iwo out there.
Was it being bombarded at that time?
Yes, it was amazing how many ships were out there. Battleships, cruisers, destroyers, destroyer escorts, the whole sea, as far as you could see was ships. And the 4th Division had joined us at that point in time. And they were to land on the north end of the strip, landing strip. The big guns from the battleships were pounding Iwo. And for several months before that, our aircraft had dropped bombs in there. And it was said that there was more bombing done on Iwo than all the other islands put together that we had hit. Little did we know that this bombing wasn't doing a bit of good, because all the Japs had to do was go into the caves or in the underground tunnels that they'd built. So it did little damage as far as personnel-wise.
But the location of Iwo Jima was critical, was it not, to the continuing bombing of Japan? It was so much closer than Guam, Saipan, or Tinian among those.
Yeah, the basic reason for getting Iwo was the fact that the B-29s going from Saipan to Japan to bomb, a good majority of them wouldn't make it back to their home base due to being hit by shrapnel or anti-aircraft guns. And the B-29 had a bad record of engine failure. So the only thing that they could do if they was in trouble was land in the ocean, and then they would probably never be picked up. Iwo gave them a place to land where they could do repairs, gas up again, and it's told that many thousands of Air Force personnel were saved just for the fact that they had the place to land on Iwo. So it was well worth the loss of life.
It almost took the place of an aircraft carrier that would be out in the ocean, but in this case it was a permanent base.
Right, it's a good acronym to see, yeah. Yeah, because it saved a lot of aircraft, a lot of aircraft personnel.
Now, what was it like to approach the island from the sea, knowing that it was well defended, that even though it had been shelled many times over by ships at sea and or bombs from the air, as you're approaching that volcanic shoreline, tell us how you felt as you're approaching the island.
Well, you'll probably laugh at what I say. The only thing I could think of heading for that beach was get this Higgins boat on dry land so I wouldn't get my feet wet. And that was my attitude that I had when we hit Iwo and throughout the campaign. Like I say, maybe one time I was scared, but I don't recall it. Well, when I seen one of my buddies hit in the rear end, he just went crazy, crying and screaming and everything. I had hurt, I'm sure, But I swore to myself at that point in time that when I got hit, and if I did, that I would never crack up or go in this state of shock. I just refused to do that. And I think this attitude helped me through the campaign, really.
Were any of the landing craft coming in, though, hit by Japanese mortar or artillery? Did you see any of this in front of you as you were approaching land?
I didn't see it personally. Films that I've seen since then, I've seen where shells landed right in the middle of a Higgins boat and blow everything out. By the time we landed on the 11th wave, there was Higgins boats on the beach, tanks, other armored vehicles that was just blown up. And after I had landed, a few waves after that, it was having trouble finding a place where Higgins boats could drop the troops off.
The beach was real crowded.
Right. Luckily, when I hit the beach, I got there and on dry land. The first waves that went in put white tape around the anti-tank mines that was on the beach. It was a good size half-moon shape with two prongs going out the side. And old Pebbles, he heads right towards one. But I jumped right through the two prongs and continued on.
So you didn't get your feet wet after all.
Right. And some of my buddies told me afterwards that they yelled at me and they hugged the ground because they figured I was going to blow that landmine up. But the beach was crowded. It took a long time for everybody to move out. There was a lot of them that got up finally and started advancing across the island. But there was still a lot that was never move again. And they was there. They was killed. And the beach was pretty well littered with our dead already. The 27th and the 28th Marines was to cut across the neck of the island and isolate Mount Suribachi from the northern portion of the island. And on day 2, the 28th Marines was to head south and take Mount Suribachi, and the 27th Marines was to head north and tie up with 4th Division.
Did you sleep well the first night?
No, you never sleep well because you're always getting incoming rounds from mortars and so on. We first night we dug in with two-man foxholes. One would sleep, one would stay on watch. And there's no movement except corpsmen when somebody needed a corpsman. And they were given a password, usually a president's name, and so the people wouldn't fire on them when they seen the movement. We had one Marine as he's crossing the island on the first day, he picked up a Thompson submachine gun, and he cleaned it up real good and everything, and that night he seen movement out there. He fired that thing 7 times, and it misfired each time. And then we found out that that was one of our outposts that was watching for any banzai attacks or counterattacks during the night. Next morning, woke up and he looked at it and pulled the trigger and it started firing right away. Now, if that ain't fate, I don't know what it is.
He would have killed his own men.
Right, yeah.
And in worse trouble then.
On the first day, we had 2 men wounded and 2 men killed in our platoon. And on the second day, the 27th, 1st Battalion and 2nd Battalion was to lead the charge going north. And our 3rd Battalion was kind of in reserve in case of a counterattack. We was there right behind them just in case to help prevent any advancement through our lines.
So your goal at that time, Gene, was to go up the far side of the island,
right,
towards the airfield, or had that airfield already been?
No, we was right at the beginning of the airfield, low side of the airfield. Mm-hmm. And we was to go forward and join up then with the 4th Division on the right side of the island. Our platoon was on the rim of a big bomb crater about 20 feet wide and 20 feet deep. And some of our platoon had already tried to cross the airfield and was forced back. And a good Liberty friend of mine came running over the edge and down to the bottom of the crater. And Corbin started working on him right away, but he died almost immediately. And that was my first taste of death of a close friend on Iwo.
And were you able to control your emotions at that point? Or
Yeah.
what sort of reaction did you have?
You had a sad feeling, and I don't know, I don't remember that I cried or anything, but yeah, you felt the death. It bothered you, but it didn't affect what you had to do. All right, it didn't affect me for what we knew we had to do. We tried to get tank support up to help us across this little part of the airstrip, and they was busy elsewhere, and they told us we had to move out. So I got up when it was my turn, my trusty BAR, and got about halfway across the airstrip, and machine gun was taking off after me. And I seen a little knee mortar hole up there, and I dove for it. Of course, all I could get in there was my belly, nothing else, and which wasn't a whole lot of protection. And machine gun came across me again. Two guys fell behind me, and I looked back and asked them if they was all right. And it was a corpsman and another Marine. They said, "No, we're fine. We're just hiding behind you, Pebbles." Then he came across me again and knocked asphalt in my neck here, and it was time to leave that spot. So I started running across the airfield, and I happened to look down at my feet, and the bullets was just hitting right at my feet. And I don't know if I was scared then or what happened, but I just stopped and hesitated for a moment. Of course, he kept going with his gun, and when I took off again, he never did catch me, and I was glad of that. We made a small advancement that day, and I think we ended up with, in our platoon, we had 3 killed and 4 wounded on the second day. Third day, the weather got pretty bad, and it was overcast. We had heavy resistance, but we did make about 1,000 yards that third day.
It's just a little over half a mile
Right,
for the whole day.
right. And we came across a lot of caves, a lot of concrete emplacements and everything.
Did you use flamethrowers in the event of coming upon a cave? Or how
Right,
did you approach it?
we had flamethrowers, and one of the men in our platoon was named Max, had it. He eventually got Bronze Star for all he did. But after we gained that 1,000 yards, we decided we would dig in, and we'd gone far enough that day. But after a fellow named Stensis and myself dug a foxhole on a slight incline, and Corporal Olson, he was just above me a little bit in another foxhole. And we had another heavy counterattack that hit our platoon directly. And I'm firing away with my BAR. Every 5th round in there was a tracer bullet. And I was shooting at what I thought was a cave, so I could tell I was right on target. And I happened to turn around, and Stensis had his helmet knocked off, and a hunk of his skull was completely off, and you could see his brain. He was still alive. His eyes were closed, but Olson gave him some gum and told him to chew it like mad, and we kept at him, keep chewing, and we bandaged up his head the best we could. Cormans was busy all over the place and couldn't get over to us. We tried to get a stretcher bearer up there, and they were hard to come by. They were taking just as much of beating as everybody else because they was right out in the open, standing up, moving the wounded back to the aid station. So we loaded Stensis up on his poncho and carried him back about 200 yards to where we finally seen a stretcher bearer, and he took him back to the aid station. We learned later, several weeks later, that they'd put a steel plate in his head and he was still alive, and I don't know how he did it, but we just kept at him, chew that gum, just to keep him active and his mind thinking. And we went back, and it was pretty well quieted down by the time we got back to our foxhole. That third day, I think we had 3 killed and 5 wounded in our platoon. On the 4th day, it really came overcast, and we was approaching airfield number 2, and we didn't make too much of a gain that day, but we had got word that there was about 109 in our battalion that was wounded that day, and we was lucky and just had 3 wounded on the 3rd day.
Now, as far as replacing those in the platoon, were others coming in to join
Yeah,
the platoon?
we had raw recruits that they tried to replace us as best as they could. The 3rd Marine Division that had been left out at sea and was not supposed to land because it was supposed to be a 3-day affair. And they had finally landed because we need all 3 divisions.
They were the reserves
Right.
coming in finally.
Yeah. You know, the 5th day was cold, wet, and foggy, and made very little gain that day. But one time when we stopped, somebody had a telescope, and I asked if I could use it. And I happened to be looking around, and I focused in on Mount Suribachi, and there was a flag.
The famous flag raising on top
Yeah.
of Suribachi.
Everybody stood up and screamed and laughed. Man, this is just about over.
Yeah,
Little we knew it just started.
yeah. Ways to go.
But 5th day we had just 1 wounded, but we've been hit pretty hard, and we was put in reserves for the next 4 days. We dug larger foxholes so we'd be a little more comfortable.
So when you say in reserve, you were moved back off the front line?
No, we just stayed where we
Stay
are,
where you were.
and the others advanced in front of us. Right? Yeah. Never retreat on a Marine.
No going back, always forward.
But started digging our foxholes, and it was just like digging in a barrel of wheat. Sand, it was so soft and sandy, it just kept caving in. And our foxhole ended up being almost 5 feet wide, 6 feet long, and 4 or 4.5 feet deep.
Did you try to board it up? Was there anything to?
Well, we didn't have anything to do that. We finally got it where it was livable. And it started pouring down rain. And in one corner, the dirt fell off, and there was a big bomb that hadn't gone off. So we can't stay in this foxhole with that dud there. So we move over 6 or 8 feet and dig another foxhole the same size. Like that would do us any good if it went off. But the next morning we got up and we was taking fire, and especially towards the beach. They was lobbing artillery down there. And a truck pulled up. We just on a slight rise, and just down below was the road that went alongside the airfields. And a truck pulled up there, and it was an open bed truck with supplies. 2 Marines were in there, and I was watching them unload the bullets and stuff that they had in there, food, whatever was in there, and a shell lit right in the middle of the truck and just blew them right out of the bed. We never heard, but I'm sure that they were killed when they couldn't have helped because the ammunition blew up and everything else. The next day, 3 tanks came up to the same place, and the same artillery knocked off. I sent him a copy of what I had written in hopes it would bring back some memories to him. Corporal Olson came up to me and says, "Gene, let's go down there and see what we can get out of those tanks." And of course, he's corporal, I'm PFC, so I got to follow orders, so we went down. He jumped in one tank and threw out 2 45s, once for each of us. And then he started throwing out cans of Van Camp's pork and beans. I don't know how many we had a slew of them. Well, what happened next? The Japs seen us, and they started dropping artillery on those tanks again. Well, Olson was inside, and I was hunkered down behind the tanks, and finally they quit the firing. He jumped out, and we picked up our booty and head back up where our foxholes were. that bombing at that time was nothing compared to what our sergeant chewed us out with for being down there. So, but they enjoyed the Van Camp's pork and beans, I'll tell you that. Up till the 27th, we had had a total of 9 killed in our platoon and 18 wounded. It was time that we was to move out, and we was going to prepare to hit Hill 362, which was one of the basic points that the Jap had set up to hold the island.
Now, was Hill 362 above or alongside the airfield? Airfield number 1, you've already passed.
Right.
The second airfield was on the other side of the hill, or was the hill part of the defense of the second airfield?
Hill 362 was alongside the up northern portion of the airfield on the western side of it, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was pretty much split. It was one hill here, the bigger portion over here, and kind of a ravine that went up.
That's why they called it A and B?
No, B's was another hill just about the same altitude, but on further north. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, but it was, the whole hill was just 362A. That morning, just before we moved out to get in position to hit 362, we were standing up in these deep foxholes that we had, and you could look up in the sky and just focus on one point, and you could see the artillery that the Japanese were firing. It was going over, just as it passed your line of sight. And while we stand there, all of a sudden we heard a thud, and 2 feet out, right in front of us, there was a little funnel place where probably a 75 millimeter hit and didn't go off. I was getting the feeling that I was having too many close calls. I was going to be in trouble one of these days.
You were wondering if your time was up.
Right. But we took off and made it almost to Hill 362 and dug in for the night. And then on February 28th, we advanced towards Hill 362. It was about 200 yards of open country going across to that. And our company was to hit it straight on. I Company and G Company was going to hit the hills on each side of us. Luckily, going across that open area, the Japs stayed in cover and didn't fire on us or anything. And we actually reached the hill before they started firing at us. We went into a little ravine that, or our platoon did, a little ravine that kind of separated the hill. And we got pinned down there where we couldn't even get back to our reformed lines. Some of the other two companies on each side of us were hit real hard at that point in time because the Japs came out of the caves and the tunnels and just bore down on us. There was about 12 guys shot in the first 2 or 3 minutes and all hit in the head. They was accurate as far as their shooting. At that time, our corpsman that was attached to our platoon was working on 2 of the casualties that he had. And evidently there were some Japs close by him, and they threw grenades at him. And he threw the grenade back and kept working on the people. And they threw 7 grenades at him, but he refused to leave. He just kept throwing them back. And that 8th one, they held a little longer and killed both the ones that was wounded and killed the corpsman. He received the Congressional Medal of Honor for that. Finally, most of the company got moved back to reform our lines so we could see what we was going to do. We'd been hit real hard. And our platoon was still pinned down in this little ravine. And the sergeant had Olson go up and see if we could see where all the grenades and rifle fire was coming from, and he never did come back. So he sent me up there, and I'm standing by a rock, and a bullet hit right there, just about 8 inches from my heart. Another close call.
Wow.
Getting too many of those. But finally, things quieted down, and we got back to where the lines were reformed. And that day we had 25 casualties. We had 16 killed in our platoon alone, and 9 were wounded. When we fell back, we was at a small knoll, just about 200 yards from the hill 362. And we had a machine gun emplacement just on the front side of the hill, and I was to the right of the hill. That was a sulfur island, and the Japanese dug the sulfur, had workers doing it, and send that back to the homeland. But it was always burning, always hot. And all night long, I was in a hot spot, and I had to keep turning over all night long because of the heat from the sulfur burning. In fact, I planted a can of sea rations in the ground and had warm chow that evening.
Your own private
Stove, yeah.
stove, yeah.
The next morning we woke up and we was told that we was just decimated so bad that the 28th Marines was going to take over. And a lot of our group was around the base of that little knoll. And there was a big trench to my left that the Japanese had dug out. And instead of a straight cut at the end, it was kind of like this. And we heard a whistle, and a shell went off at the top of the knoll, so we knew it was a home shell. It was a 37 millimeter. So everybody dove for the trench, and I got on the part where my head was sticking out. And the next shot, 37 lit right at my head, about 2 feet from my head. And it felt like the wind was knocked out of me. Had a little trouble breathing right there at first. And I looked up and I could see the ground steaming where the shell had hit.
It was a Japanese shell.
No, it was our own shell. Yeah, friendly fire, which you can't get away from.
Yeah.
And of course, the majority of the blast went forward. I took off my pack, and a buddy of mine hit my back, and I said, "No, I'm fine." So I put it back on, and pretty soon I felt something running down my back. So I took my pack off, and my combat jacket and my dungarees were soaked with blood. So the corpsman came over and patched me up. But the blast went forward and killed one Marine that was around the base of that knoll, and Bob Neff got hit pretty bad in the lower section of his body. I was patched up and told to walk back to the beach, and so I could go aboard the hospital ship. And somebody picked me up in a Jeep, and he seen my 45, wanted to know if he could have it. He says, "You're not going to need it." I says, "Fine," and I gave it to him. When I got to the Higgins boat, Bob Neff was in there laying on the bottom of it. And he says, "Pebbles, is my legs all right?" He says, "They just don't feel right." And the corpsman kind of shook his head to me. And I told Bob, I said, "You're going to be all right. We'll be aboard the hospital ship real soon, and they'll take care of you." Well, he died that night, and I got to see him buried at sea the next day. From then on, we had about 21 killed in our platoon towards the end of the battle and 8 wounded. We ended up with 43 killed in our platoon in the headquarters company, 33 wounded, and there was only 5 in our platoon that got through without a scratch.
Well, this is like 2 or 3 times over. In other words, if the platoon ran from 12 to 15 and you had that many casualties, that means you were one of the few that remained standing, I guess.
Right.
Except for the friendly fire that took you out. The Japanese didn't take you out. An accidental hit,
Right.
you might say,
Right.
took you off the beach or off the island.
Yeah, we had the corpsman, like I said, got the Congressional Medal of Honor. Our lieutenant of the platoon, he was wounded, went back and got fixed up, came back, and he got killed later on. He was awarded the Navy Cross. We had 4 Silver Stars in our platoon and 4 Bronze Stars. I never did know what they did to get them, but I'm sure that they did something that merited that receipt. I was shipped to Guam at that point in time, and they operated on my back, and the shrapnel was too close to my spine, so they couldn't get it out. They just left it. But they opened up the wound where it would heal from the inside out. And we went back to San Francisco, where I unloaded, and was there just a few days.
The shrapnel is still in your body?
Right, it's next to my
That's good.
spine, yeah. Never bothers me.
No problems with
No.
weather, change in weather, nothing like that really affects you?
Only one time, just a couple of years ago, I went in to get a MRI on my neck. And it was the first time I had an open MRI. Closed MRIs never bothered me, but they always ask you if you got any metal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he shoved me in there, and as I was going in that to get the MRI, it felt like that they was trying to pull that shrapnel out. I mean, it hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But after I got in there, it wasn't too bad. But I complained about it, and he pulled me out and put some pillows underneath my knees and shoved me back in. And same thing, just as I was going in, man, it burned or something. And he started taking tests, and he says, "You got some metal in you?" I said, "Yeah, I wrote down on this slip of paper I did."
Mm-hmm.
And he assumed I had it in my legs, he said. You don't make an assumption like that.
Oh.
But I said, "It just hurts going in. I can stand the pain while I'm in there, so we'll go ahead and do it." But that's the only time I had any effects from my shrapnel. So other than that, it never bothers me, and I get my 10% disability check every month. But we went from San Francisco to the hospital at Great Lakes. I was there a few days, and then I got to go down to Indianapolis and visit my family, because I hadn't written them since before we had EWO, so they had no idea how I was.
Was the war still on in the Pacific?
Yeah, and EWO was still going on, yeah, at that point in time. And when they released me at Great Lakes, I had a 30-day liberty. I went down, visited the family at that time, ended up getting married then too, and headed for Holly Ridge in North Carolina and Camp Davis. And it was an MP down there, and we was training Dutch Marines at that point in time.
So you were back on your feet, obviously.
Right, yeah.
Still serving in the Marine Corps
Right.
while the war was winding down.
Yeah. And somebody happened to look at my records and seen I went through a 16 millimeter training, tearing it down, running and everything. So they had me run 35 millimeter movies at Camp Lejeune for the rest of the time I was there. They had a chaplain that was living right close to us, and he drove to Lejeune every morning. So I rode up with him, took care of the film, showed a movie in the afternoon, and that night went back, enjoyed life at home. And I was finally discharged on February of 1946. I went back to work at the old electronic firm until they went belly up. And then I went over to the Naval Ordnance Facility, which made the Norton bomb site for all the bombers, and started working for the Department of Defense at that point in time. And I worked there until 1958 when we moved back out to Phoenix. And I was working for DOD at that time, buying equipment at all the plants in Phoenix and Albuquerque, Tucson, White Sands. And I retired in 1980 and moved up to the mountains where I built my home up there now. I went to one reunion of the 5th Marine Division, but didn't know anybody. Went to about 3 reunions of the paratroopers, and at one second reunion, some of the paratroopers that went over to EWO on one of those trips that they took and brought back some of the black sand and put them in little vials that the 35 millimeter film was in.
So you have some.
So I have some of the sand from Iwo Jima. Yeah. I'd like to close at this point in time, unless you have any other questions.
I think you've done an excellent job.
I have a certain philosophy that I wish the government would abide by. discounting the war now in Iraq and Iran, because we don't know how it's going to end, what we're going to do, pull out, win, or what. But World War II was the last war that we went in to win and get a good action from the end. The Vietnam War, the Korean War, we sent our men over there to fight a containment war. And the only ones that win in a type of war like that is the enemy. We can't tie the hands of our young people going in any conflict unless you're willing to give full reins to finish the war. Otherwise, just stay out of it. My heart just goes out for the young generation now, because we've got a situation not like World War II, because terrorism is a whole different type of fighting. It isn't any one particular country normally that is backing it. There's a few that do, but to fight terrorism is going to be a whole new type of warfare, and how we're going to end up, we don't know at this point in time. I'm just really concerned about it. But I'll leave that to the younger generation to handle, I guess. I sure thank you for the time that you've given me. Maybe nobody will ever see this. Maybe somebody will, and learn something from what we did back then. We were just a bunch of people that came to the call of something that had to be done. They call us the greater generation, but we was just a generation that started a change that is continually growing and getting better each day. And I just hope our people always stick together to fight for this country's protection and our protection abroad when it affects us. It would be wonderful if we could save everybody in the world that wants to break away and have freedom like we have, but we don't have that capabilities. Just hopefully that we can help some receive the freedom and have the happiness that we have here. And that's my prayer. Thank you.
Well, Gene, I can't thank you enough for these concluding words. Besides the story of your exemplary service during World War II for the U.S. Marine Corps and the United States of America. So I'm sure that many will be hearing this message from you in the months and years ahead, your family especially, and of course the story will be sent up to the Library of Congress, so you'll be part of a national collection of veterans' experiences in not only World War II, but the conflicts that have followed. So on behalf of the Augusta-Richmond County Historical Society, we welcomed this opportunity to have you visit with your daughter and to hear your story, which is among the most impressive we've heard so far. So thank you once more for attending the interview and providing us with an excellent recollection of your days in the Pacific. Thank you once more.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate that. This is a picture of me when I was at Camp Pendleton with my BAR. This is the left side of Hill 362. Our platoon hit this hill directly in this direction here. I came up over this way and settled down here in the bottom of the ravine. And another fellow jumped off at this place here, balanced himself holding his hand here, and he got hit right in the hand. Two other Marines walked right past me and standing upright and got hit in the head.
Where were you being fired upon? From what direction?
The hill, the main part of the hill was on this side, and it was being fired down this way. The sergeant had Corporal Olson go up here to see if he could see where the firing came from. And when he didn't return, I went up here and stood by this rock right here. and that's where the bullet hit, just to the right of my arm here at heart level. So I took off back down this side, and Olson was back here. He'd been hit in the shoulder, and the corpsman was patching him up. But we was pinned down here for most of the afternoon, didn't get back to our reformed lines till almost dark. This is a picture of me when I got back to Indianapolis and had it taken. This was after Ewell, and I was a much nicer looking lad at that time than I am now.
You haven't changed a bit.